Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the PAO event?
I am ready for the PAO event.
CBS is Face the Nation. This is Mission Control Houston. Please call station for a voice check.
Station, this is Face the Nation. How do you hear me?
I have you loud and clear. Welcome aboard the space station.
We're back with a very long-distance remote. Astronaut Scott Kelly joins us from the International Space Station. Commander Kelly, you first went into space in 1999. What's different now?
Well, my first flight was on just on the space shuttle. It was to the Hubble Space Telescope, and that was before we had the International Space Station. It wasn't a few years later before we launched the first people to the space station, the first human presence in space, which we've had for the last 15 years. So, it's a much different experience now with this International Space Station and the international cooperation and all the research we have that go with it than what we were doing back in the 1990s and previously.
How about for you personally, though, being in space now relative to that very first time you went?
Well, flying in space is a privilege, whether it's the first time or the fourth time. But, obviously back then it was my first flight. It was 7 days long. And, since then I've flown 3 times previous or subsequently durations of, 13 days, 159 days. And now, this flight will be close to a year. So they've been getting larger and larger each time. And I think if I fly a 5th time, it'll have to be to Mars to get that kind of duration that'll be required to keep up the trend.
Before we go any further, what room are you in there?
So I am in the U.S. Destiny Laboratory module, which is like the main module for the U.S. side of the space station. It's a combination of laboratory and sort of like the bridge of a ship. I guess you could describe it with a lot of the systems that are required to operate the space station are in here, as well as experiments.
And in case there are any conspiracy theorists out there, how would you prove to us that you're in zero gravity?
I would just do this for a while, and unless I was falling, that would be kind of hard to do.
That's convinced me. When George Mallory was asked why he climbed Everest, he said, because it's there. Is it a similar thing for you in going to space? What motivates you to be there?
I like challenges, and I was a Navy pilot and test pilot, and for me, flying in space seemed like the logical, next step as far as, things that would challenge me. But, what I've come to find that makes this a very satisfying experience and satisfying profession for me is doing something that's extremely, extremely difficult. Having, people live in space here and do the type of work we do for the last 15 years is, could arguably be more difficult than when we went to the moon, building a space station and operating it for so long. And, for me, having the privilege to work in this program and being a part of something so hard is, what has made this worth it for me.
NASA has put a call out for those who might want to be astronauts. What would you look for if you were on the hiring committee?
So I was on the hiring committee last time, and we picked a great group. And, what we look for are people that are technically competent. You need a background in, in the scientific field, whether it's as a scientist, an engineer, medical doctor, or, a person that's in the military with some kind of technical background. And we want those people to have proven themselves in their current profession, being very high performers, but also people that get along well as part of a team, because this is a huge team effort, not just your crew members here on board, but also with all the folks you have to work with on the ground. And, just a really a diverse group of people with, skills that are very broad. We have a lot of systems here on board the space station, and we can't call a repairman when one of them breaks, so we have to be kind of generalists in a lot of ways.
You've done hundreds of experiments, or you're doing hundreds of experiments. What's the coolest thing you've done so far?
It's kind of hard to say. If we're talking about this flight, I would have to say, the 2 spacewalks I got to do, because I had never done those before, and that's a very challenging experience. I think in general, the launch, the landing are pretty exciting. As far as specific kind of research experiments, the stuff we've done with rodents is pretty interesting, as well as the human research that we're doing with Misha and I as part of this 1-year research experiment. The reason why we're here in space for a year has been pretty interesting stuff.
Have you noticed any of the effects on space that you're there to look at and discover in yourself?
A lot of the data we collect is stuff that has to be analyzed on the ground. For instance, we can't see, bone loss ourselves. That's something that we'll have to notice with imaging technology when I get back. But there are certain things we could see with regards to muscle mass, like the amount of muscle I've lost in my calf muscle because we don't walk up here is pretty significant. Some effects on my vision initially, although those have kind of leveled off and have been pretty consistent with what I had on my last flight. But we're also looking at, the effects of this environment, the microgravity environment and the radiation environment on myself on a genetic level, how my DNA is affected. And that's using my brother as a control subject on the ground. So some of the things we can see, I've seen some muscle loss. I've seen some muscle gain because of the amount of exercise we do. But some of it's stuff that we'll have to analyze once I get back on the ground.
Is it still a thrill to look out the window?
Yeah, it's, the Earth is a very beautiful place. It's, thrilling to look at. But like a lot of things, if you see it often, it's not as thrilling as the first time you've seen it, but it still never fails to impress.
Have you been following the news from up there? I mean, have you watched, what do you think of the presidential campaign that's going on down here on Earth?
Yeah, so we have the news on pretty much all the time, unless we're watching something specific, and we have coverage about 50 minutes every hour. So I do follow it very closely, and I have to say it's been very interesting.
I also heard you watched Game of Thrones while you were up there. How long do you think you'd last up there if you worked with your colleagues the way they do on Game of Thrones?
I'd like to think I would last a long time, but you never know. But the good news is we don't work that way. We actually get along very well. It's an international space station. We have crew members from both the U.S. and Russia, and now the United Kingdom, with Tim Peake from the UK, Tim Koper and Yuri Melenchenko arriving just yesterday. And, it's great to see that on this space station we can work, across cultures in a very, very cooperative way.
All right, Commander Scott Kelly, we thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the CBS Face the Nation portion of the event. Please stand by for a voice check from CNN International.
Station, this is CNN. How do you hear me?
We hear you loud and clear. Welcome aboard the space station.
Well, it is a huge thrill for us to welcome you to our program and for me to be able to talk to you all the way out there in space. It's really exciting. But you're halfway through nearly a year-long mission. Is it ho-hum for you at this point, or is it still gee whiz? Scott Kelly.
Yeah, Christiane, there are certain parts about it that at certain times I do kind of, take a step back and I realize, I'm living in space and doing, this work that I consider a privilege. But we've been up here now over 260 days. So, sometimes it, the daily routine is somewhat of a routine. But there are those moments that, impress me, and I'm sure Misha in a very profound way.
Let me ask you, Mikhail, Kornienko, how does it feel to be up there so long? Nearly 6 months now.
Михаил, можно задать вам вопрос тогда? Скажите, как вы себя ощущаете на борту? Вот какие ощущения? Ведь вы так долго уже пробыли в космосе, примерно уже 6 месяцев.
Я пробовал примерно 9 месяцев.
Actually, it's not 6, it's 9 months. So I'm feeling fine. Besides, my crew is just great, wonderful. All the crews that worked on board with me are great professionals. Of course, as any of us, I miss my family, my home.
Можно сказать, что я
But I can say that I am happy, excited, and very proud to be entrusted with this mission.
Let me ask you both, as I love watching you float that microphone back and forth to each other. You are watching our planet with a view unlike anyone else in this universe right now. And you've just seen a climate deal reached in Paris, about 200 nations signing on. Were you surprised that it would happen? I know you lobbied for it. And what is, your take on the survival of our planet? Scott Kelly, first you.
Well, a couple of things. I was surprised on the agreement because just to get that many people to agree to anything is pretty difficult. So, in that regard, it was, a historic event. And, hopefully it'll continue to be supported. I think it has to go back to, all the individual countries and still gain, their support. With regards to the planet, having this vantage point from space, you do see things like the thinness of the atmosphere that are alarming. I mean, it just looks very fragile. We can, see the effects of our presence on Earth by looking out the window. There are certain areas of the globe that are almost constantly covered with pollution. We can see weather systems that don't normally occur in certain areas that we now see more commonly. So, I think it's something that's very important for the collective group of people that require this planet for them to survive. It's kind of funny. People say, we need to save the Earth. I think what we need to save is us because, the Earth is probably going to last a long time, but, we need the environment of the Earth to be able to sustain us, so we have to protect it.
Good point. Let me ask you both. Obviously, your two nations, Russia and the United States and many others, cooperated on this agreement, but they are at loggerheads on so many other big issues today, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Syria, whatever it might be. I'm just curious, does politics play any role up there, all those miles away in space?
Разрешите мне задать вопрос для обоих. Дело в том, что вот мы наблюдали, как был подписан конференция по климату в Париже, соглашение это подписали по защите климата. Однако в то же время как Россия, так и Америка и другие страны работают вместе на борту. Скажите, а вот как вот политические вопросы, например, вот Украина, Сирия, влияют ли они на вот, скажем, экипаж как-либо? Есть ли споры между вами?
Well, Christiane, so clearly it's something we're obviously aware of. I mean, we follow the news. It's not something we generally discuss between each other, although sometimes we do. What's most important to, Misha and I and our, Russian colleagues and them with us is that we have to rely on each other literally for our lives. And, not only are we great friends, but we are completely reliant on each other. If there's an emergency up here, that we have to take care of one another. And that's, for us, the most, important thing. And, we understand that there can be conflict at times between nations. And, I think one of the great things about this space station is we have demonstrated that, two cultures that are, somewhat different and then sometimes can be at odds with one another over certain things have demonstrated that they can work together in a very cooperative way. It's something very, very difficult for a long period of time.
Ну, собственно, мне остается только присоединиться к словам.
I can only join in and say that the international station is free of any politics. We are very polite and always very considerate of each other in such discussions. Furthermore, I would say that our work here and our cooperation on board the ISS is a great example for all politicians, because if they spent at least 1 month on board together, it would have probably resolved most of their problems and discussions on the ground.
Well, you've given me and the whole world now a whole great program. Maybe we should send them all up to space and they can solve all the world's problems up there, like you're working so hard. What are some of the real kind of hardships, for instance, physically? I understand you have to really work out hard in order not to atrophy, for your muscles not to break down.
Yeah, our bodies are pretty smart. They recognize in this microgravity environment that you don't need your skeleton to, hold all your stuff together. So we lose bone mass because we don't need it. And likewise with your muscles. So we have to do exercise to prevent that from happening. But, there are other hardships, too, up here that we deal with them and we understand it. And but the fact that you can't go outside, I mean, you can occasionally do a spacewalk, but that's not like walking outside in the fresh air, or at least a different the kind of air that you experience on a daily basis. The space station is nice, but there's no running water. You can't take a shower. The diet gets pretty routine. So all that is something that we've learned to live with, but we still understand that it's a big privilege to represent our countries up here.
Scott and Mikhail, I know we don't have a huge amount of time. I can see one of your colleagues behind you who's sort of dancing and floating around in zero gravity, doing whatever he's doing there. Can you do something for us? Can you flip? Can you dance? What do you like to do for exercise up there? Both of you? Oh, my goodness.
So that's not much exercise, but it's fun.
Well, Scott Kelly, Mikhail Kornienko, thank you so much for joining us from space today. It's a big one for me today.
Our pleasure, Christiane. Thanks for allowing us to be on your program.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the event. Thank you.
Thank you, CBS Face the Nation and CNN International Station. We're now resuming operational audio communications.